Hi, I'm Gordon from Camera Labs, and in this video I'll be examining the photo quality of the Alpha 1, Sony's flagship mirrorless camera with a full-frame 50 megapixel sensor. I tested a final production model running firmware 1.0. This video will cover the resolution, noise and pixel shift quality and includes direct comparisons with the Canon EOS R5. Now admittedly that is a cheaper body, but it's one with similar photo resolution, so I know lots of you will be curious to see how the quality compares. I know I was. I'm also working on my full review of the Alpha 1, but at the time I made this video, full production Alpha 1 bodies had only been available for a few days, which is not long enough for me to make a meaningful report on handling and overall performance. So my full review will come at a later date and I'll link to it here when it's ready. But I have had long enough to photograph and analyse my test targets, so since those results are ready right now, I thought I'd share them sooner rather than later. Okay, let's start with resolution and a standard test chart shot with the Sony Alpha 1 using the FE 35mm f1.4 G Master at f8. That is one of the sharpest lenses in the system. Zooming in on the details reveals the Alpha 1's 50 megapixel sensor is out-resolving the chart, but is it measurably better than the 45 megapixel EOS R5? So here's the Alpha 1 on the left and the R5 on the right, the latter equipped with an RF 24-70 f2.8L at 35mm f8. Now that's obviously not a prime lens, but it is the sharpest way to achieve 35mm in the RF system at the time I made this video. Dedicated pixel peepers may notice the Sony on the left is arguably resolving those finest lines a fraction more clearly than the Canon, but I'd essentially call it a draw in terms of potential detail here. Just for the record, while there's a 5 megapixel difference in total pixels, that doesn't equate to much of a boost to the Sony on the actual frame. A1 files measure 8640 by 5760 pixels, while R5 files measure 8192 by 5464 pixels, so that only equates to a 5% increase in horizontal or vertical resolution to the Sony over the Canon, and that's not going to make a big difference in real life. In terms of native sensor resolution, the 61 megapixel A7R4 with 9504 by 6336 pixels remains the king of the full framers, although both it and the A1 can boost their potential resolutions even further with composite pixel shift modes that I'll show you in just a moment. Moving on to noise, I photographed this still life scene with both the Alpha 1 and the R5 fitted with the same lenses as above and at every ISO sensitivity. I shot each frame in RAW plus JPEG mode, but at the time I made this video, RAW support for the Alpha 1 was too limited to make a fair comparison, so we're looking at out of camera JPEGs for now. I'll include more comparisons in my final review here on YouTube and also at cameralabs.com. First I'll run through the Alpha 1's extended sensitivity range, which runs between 50 and 102,400 ISO. That's one stop lower and one stop higher than the R5's available range. While both bodies share 100 ISO as their base sensitivities, I do appreciate having a 50 ISO option on the Sony when you want to deploy long exposures or shoot with very fast apertures in bright conditions. From these results, I'd say the Alpha 1 is clean and detailed up to 400 ISO, then begins to take a hit at 800 ISO and a bigger dent on fine detail at 1600 ISO. At 3200 ISO, noise artifacts have become quite visible under close inspection and steadily reduce the overall quality as the sensitivity increases. Now everyone's mileage varies, but I'd try my hardest to shoot the A1 below 3200 ISO and for the best quality at 400 ISO or lower still. Okay, now for a side by side with the Alpha 1 on the left and the EOS R5 on the right between 100 and 51,200 ISO. And the first thing you'll notice is how the Sony files look a little sharper with finer details. Much of this is down to processing with the default settings though, with the Sony applying greater sharpening and higher contrast than the Canon does by default. That said, out of the camera, I think the Alpha 1 is doing a great job here, extracting the maximum detail with zero effort. At the upper end of the ISO scale, you're really looking at different approaches to noise reduction, and while the Canon does look a little cleaner, the actual amount of recorded detail to play with is pretty similar. Okay, let's return to that comparison at 100 ISO again, with the Alpha 1 on the left and the EOS R5 on the right, both JPEGs out of camera, and again with the Canon looking a bit softer. Now since the R5 is fully supported by Adobe Camera right now though, I thought I'd include a quick comparison where I've switched the JPEG on the right for one made with the R5 RAW file with noise reduction turned down and sharpening turned up. Now I realise this isn't particularly fair as the Sony on the left is still a JPEG, but I wanted to illustrate how there's normally a little more detail that can be extracted from Canon files, whereas the Sony JPEGs are typically already showing most or even all of the recorded detail. So here you can see it brings the two cameras even closer. Okay, now back to the Sony Alpha 1 JPEG at 100 ISO viewed in isolation for my final comparison. This is a magnified crop from the single frame JPEG out of camera, but now here's a version made with a pixel shift multi-shoot mode using 4 raw images combined later using Sony's imaging viewer application running on a Mac or a PC. Now disappointingly, the Alpha 1, for all of its processing muscle, still doesn't perform the composite in camera. That's something that Panasonic manages to do without difficulty, and annoyingly the files are still left loose in the main DCIM folder with nothing to identify them on a Mac or a PC as part of a pixel shift sequence. But forget about that, just look at the improvement in detail. The 4-shot mode essentially demosaics the image, maintaining the same 50 megapixel dimensions as before, but with higher color resolution and reduced artifacts. It just looks much crisper, but wait, we can do even better still. So here's the 16-shot version, which not only demosaics the image, but quadruples the total pixel count to 200 megapixels, potentially doubling the horizontal and vertical resolution. Place this version side by side with the out-of-camera JPEG from a single frame, and now that file is the one that's looking soft in comparison. While Sony has made some improvements to the pixel shift mode on the Alpha 1, it remains best suited to completely static scenes shot from a sturdy tripod, think archive or product photography. Here's a landscape scene I took using the 4-shot mode, and while the static elements like the buildings look nice and crisp, there's undesirable artifacts around anything that moved, like the sea, birds in the sky, people and vehicles. In fact, it's only when you try and shoot a composite mode like this that you realise almost everything is in motion. You'll also notice a lot of noise in the image, so further processing of the composite raw file is advisable. But as seen in my still life example of the flowers, there's a lot of potential given the right subject and conditions. I just wish that Sony would deploy it all in camera. Okay, that's all I have for you right now. In the absence of broad RAW support at the time I made this video, I can't yet properly evaluate dynamic range, but I will include it in my final review along with full tests of the autofocus, burst shooting, movies and overall handling. Based on these initial results though, the Alpha 1 is clearly capable of excellent photo quality straight out of camera, arguably a fraction better than the EOS R5 for pixel peeping individual frames, but with the added potential for very high resolutions in the pixel shift mode under the right conditions. This is something that Canon really should be adding to its high-end cameras. Okay, make sure you subscribe to be the first to see my other Alpha 1 videos, and of course all of my camera and lens reviews. In the meantime, I also have a bunch of sample movies and photos ready for you right now to watch and download via my Alpha 1 review at cameralabs.com, link below, and that also includes a selection of 8K videos, some filmed in S-Log3 if you want to have a go at processing them yourself. Thanks for watching, let me know what you'd like me to test in my final full review, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.